All right, we're back. Look at this guy. Look at this guy on the bottom of the screen. Look at the guy on the bottom of my screen. You know what you remind me of in there? You remind me of that I think it was Rocky. Was it Rocky 3? Where he went to Russia and fought
Dolph Lundgren,
and he had to go train.
I'll take that.
He had to, he had to train in the snow. He had to grow a little beard just to keep warm because it was pretty intense.
Nice.
Or when Thor was going overweight and then he grew.
Yes. Well,
I've always kind of seen myself as Thor's friend. You know, the fat guy, the fat friend with the big hammer. That was always me, I think. Yeah.
Or Brad Pitt when in Legends of the Fall where he freaks out and he grows a beard.
Mike, just keep going, bro. I'm telling you, I've always seen a bit of Brad Pitt myself.
There's just something about it, just going away for a while and coming back with a beard. Something about
it. One time, for sure. I mean, all I've been doing, I've basically been working out, like watching movies and working out. So hopefully, I'll put on something.
Beautiful,
some muscle.
Well, hopefully, I'm definitely heavier. Everything's definitely tighter. But I don't know. I don't know if I look any better.
Yeah. So I mean, wow. Here you are back from the pilgrimage. Sharing the spoils of war with your freshly grown beard, and we're talking about
pilgrim tattoo.
Oh, look at it! Show it to us. Look at that guy. Dang, Navid. It's all over the place.
Got my ship up here. And then got the anchor into the scriptures there, and then got the swallow. So
beautiful.
It's not finished. We ran out of time, but it's getting there.
That's cool, and it's nice and relaxed. So, and while we're talking about paraphernalia, check this out.
Oh, nice.
Okay. We start with this one.
Oh, very nice.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
that's nice. Eh?
Right.
Very nice.
Right?
That's very cool.
So now, this is Andre's one. I'm wearing that one. It didn't come out as good. I'm a little bit bummed. I should have got them all black, I think.
No, that looks good.
No, that's good. I like it.
Can you see it properly?
Yeah.
I can.
It's a little bit like
it's
not like it's not it's the reason it's not coming out clearly is actually quite faint, I was hoping it would be more
for the purposes of
there we go. It is a good
there it is.
Oh,
that's very
there we go. That's good. Yeah.
It's nice. Yeah. I mean, it's got a little finesse, So anyways, I go on for you and Nick, and we'll prototype these guys running around with our 2H Sojourner rings. Oh yeah.
Nice.
And
a very exclusive club. There'll be four of us running around with them.
And Ari's got one. I gave one to Ari.
Nice.
So he's part of the exclusive club. So yeah.
Is this the thing that when you join our support page, then you get a free customized to
this is more like we got to think of something cool.
Do we have a support page? Do we have like a no?
That would be right up there with show notes. That would be right up there with show notes. But I think we need to get something like that. I'm thinking that now's the time.
Make a comment.
Just so that we can give people rings. Like, we're not going to do anything else with the money.
We get some extra info from us, somehow.
Whoever sends us a book to begin a review on and not finish, we'll get a free.
I'll give you my custom made diets and workout plan.
Whoa.
Well, who wouldn't want that?
Dude.
How to gain weight and how to fill that shit. No problem. Guaranteed new pair of trousers needed.
All right. So we're moving towards I've been thinking of this age, and thanks for springing us right into the this agely stuff there. I mean, that is about as this age as I could ever imagine things being, your workout plan. But moving towards what we've just been discussing about, maybe this is one step towards it. I don't know. We're thinking about just working through a slightly more literary pieces, and perhaps even just going full on, some secular famous classic or something, or maybe just doing a little bit of each for a while. We'll just play around with it and see where we go. And maybe an ebb towards that from all our discussion in covenant theology is our discussion tonight, which I'm quite excited about, which it feels like we should have done forever ago, but haven't. But it's like such a awesome thing. Pilgrim's Progress, and just do what we do with Pilgrim's Progress. I suppose what I'm thinking of is less like we're definitely going to fail on. I don't feel like I can bring much to the table by way of a literary analysis, which it certainly deserves, because it is just one of those great English classics. But in terms of theology, I mean, my goodness, 2 ages. Whew, you got a lot going on there. And in terms of covenant theology, there's some interesting things going on. And I was saying to Andre the other day, I don't, well, before just digging around for the show, I hadn't really even thought that anyone had even asked the question, as to what the covenant theology of Pilgrim's Progress is. But what an interesting thing to look at. So we're coming at this with varying degrees of freshness. I kind of read most of the book recently. Again, I think I got to the end. I can't remember now, but yeah, I've read it before, so I feel like I'm pretty familiar with the contents. Nick, I imagine you're the same.
Yep. So I've done the audiobook probably about 4 times. Once at the end of last year, once for this, and then I've got an abridged sort of children's version, like a modern English version. I've worked through that twice, and then sort of went for the old one twice as well, which is really
nice. Cool. Okay, so you're feeling fresh. This was the first. Thinking about it, the first book I ever read, Christian book, was a Ellen G. White, Great Controversy, which was like, turns out
which
was
you
not
then,
a Christian book,
which you then passed on to me, and so it became my first Christian book.
Check out this awesome Christian book. This is amazing. Well. Yeah,
it's all right. My first worship album was by Jamiroquai, so it was actually a step up from that.
Yeah. Mine was Salty.
Nice, Salty. I don't even know what that is.
It's a kids sing along.
Oh, amazing.
Psalty. The singing book.
Ellen G. White, actually, I need to always give her credit for. She got me onto Reformed church history, I reckon. But more than anything else, she probably just that first half of the book before the time that the second half's all about.
It got weird at the end, didn't it?
Yeah, it's like, oh, Jesus has come back already, didn't you know? He's already back, and but all the way up until that point, it's all like about these martyrs dying for the faith. Yeah.
It's like a popular version of Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Or
then it goes into
it's more historical.
Then it goes into Wesley and Whitfield and some of the Great Awakening stuff.
But also, it's actually quite it's a real bummer that it actually is staying that way, because I haven't read it recently, but from my recollection and from what I've read after that, it's one of those, it's really nicely condensed, very powerful in terms of its rhetoric, and just brings you right into the scene. And it's a bit more than Book of the Martyrs in that it kind of, it's almost like, it reminds me of like a Broadbent's Pilgrim Church. Do you know that one?
Yeah, I've got it downstairs. Yeah,
it's like kind of like a the minority church history kind of thing. All the guys, the guys that didn't win, and it just sort of plays with that theme all the way
Trail
through.
Of blood.
So, anyways, I bring that up because I have no idea why. I can't even remember. But
that was the first book you read.
First Christian book. That's where you were going.
Yes, and the second Christian book was Pilgrim's Progress, which randomly we had, like, Mom had it. Remember that hard copy, like this really nice, like amazing hard copy. It was part of a classics edition or something. And
no. I had that. No, I remember now. That was my book.
Oh,
I got it because I did a year with Scripture Union, and as part of that year, went on to the Logos ship. Those kind of ships that sail around with the stuff. Yeah. And they had a book sale there, and I bought those 3 Christian classics. And one of them was Pilgrim's Progress.
That nice hardback, the brown one. Wow.
Yeah.
That thing was nice.
Yeah. Still got those. Yeah.
So, no ways. That would be crazy for me to see that again. Like major memory. But I remember like just going, what the heck? I didn't never even, I think you do Shakespeare in high school and that's about it, in terms of, even just going back to that genre. And it was just like, what a I don't even know what I was reading half the time. I was just totally amazed by it all, and didn't understand half of it, I don't think. Then came back to it about midway through my Christian walk and loved it. And then again, and then you sort of repeat. And now I'm working through it with my oldest daughter, and just loving it. I'm just, again, now I'm appreciating all these like Tolkien-esque aspects that I'd never even considered before, just amazing little moments, and then I was going through, it was a Phil Ryken or Leland Ryken's study on it. And he actually brings out a lot of that. He was like, from the English literature side, there's a whole genre that it's working with. It's really, he kind of created that genre, and everyone else is moving in that pilgrim genre. So It's a great
so
book,
funny though. I just asked because my son's reading it at the moment, right? And I just asked him, I told him I'm doing a thing on this. Do you want, what did you think of it, by the way? And he's like, it's good, but it's too scary. Every time I pick it up and read it, I just remember the phrase, agonizing screams from the dark pits or something like that. And then I can't go to sleep.
It is real. It is real.
Yeah, totally.
So it's captured his imagination.
I remember a line from near the end, and I realized that there is a gate to hell from the gates of heaven.
Yeah. Well, even just the battle with Bunyan, and you've got just some really like hardcore moments there where it's pretty. It feels like, wow, I'm in this full on. What am I doing here? Am I reading the Bible? Am I in the Book of Revelation? Am I thinking about Tolkien? Like, am I in Lord of the Rings? I even feel like a little bit of Klein come through every now and again. It's crazy because you got those strong covenantal themes and like the drama of the warrior priest, and all of that stuff comes through in some ways. So I look forward to hearing it. I had not ever, because I read the Pilgrim's Progress like back then, and I started rereading it for this, but didn't finish it. And so like I have no covenantal lens for Pilgrim's Progress. So I'm very interested to see what covenantal stuff comes
you probably have the basic law gospel lens, the Puritan view of the law.
Yes.
The law, brings the conviction of sin, and then there's the guilty conscience of the Christian who's wrestling with the law, and you don't go to Mount Sinai, you go to the cross, and that sort of thing.
Well, interesting stuff.
One time.
But
I do think, because that's really interesting. But I do think, like, what I vividly remember reading it through the first time was just how, because I was a little way into the Christian life, like about a year in or a year and a half in, I think, when I read it, and I just remember thinking, this has been my experience. Like I read about the Slough of Despond and the dungeon of whatever it was.
Is it Slough or is it slow or is it
slow? I think it is slow. Sorry, I've
heard it pronounced. Slow.
I think we could take up the whole episode just wondering about the pronunciation of this word.
I like slow. The slow of Despond. That's
the
slough.
The slough of Despond.
I think it might depend on what part of the UK you're from, because I think different people say it different ways. But anyway, I like all that stuff. I remember just reading it and thinking, my goodness, this is just describing exactly my emotional journey.
Yes.
Like looking into things. And like the whole burden and the imagery was so easy to take hold of, because it's like, that's what it felt like. That's exactly. And so I think like the theology, which is rich as well, but also just the way it taps into that vivid Christian experience, and just reassured me that all that stuff was kind of normal. Like he's saying, this is the path, and I was just rereading now the bit where he does go through the Slough of Despond and how he says, but why, like, why couldn't it have been a safer journey? And he's like, well, because all the roads must go through this. You have to go through this. So it's just like that kind of thing was just so helpful for me.
Right. Shall I start us off with just an overview of the journey, and then we can maybe pull out some details along the way?
Yeah. Or even just before you get going with that, we probably just need to say something about Bunyan himself. I haven't got any bio prep, but it's just like, this was a hardcore dude,
Yes.
He was... Wow, he is just
a man who spent 12 years in prison because he refused to stop preaching the gospel. You needed to be licensed to preach, and he wouldn't not preach. Therefore, he was put in prison. If he agreed not to preach, he could have walked out the same day.
So and he takes care of his little kid by like making
shoelaces. Yeah, his blind daughter.
Blind daughter. Yeah. Like stuff that's so like out of this world hardcore that you just sort of like, what the heck? And I feel like that constantly knowing that story just constantly comes through in the various dialogues that I'm reading in the book, because obviously he's writing it and it's his insight the whole time. You mentioned the insight to the Christian the journey and the things you're going through. It just shows he went there all the way. There's that moment where he talks about the blasphemies, and then in his own testimony, grace abounding to the chief of sinners. Where he talks about that moment where he does, I'm pretty sure it was in that book. So one of his books where he talks about just going through a season where he just felt like these blasphemous thoughts that were uncontrollable and it almost killed him. And so that comes through in the book, and then you've got just his deep suffering, which comes through his own resolve, in Faithful's eventual martyrdom. You've got his own willingness to die there coming through. I just found that really gives some credibility to the book. You realize everything he's saying there, he's just living out, and he has so much to teach. And then just also worth mentioning, this will come up anyway, but he was like not only Reformed Baptist, but like I realized that there are many in the Reformed Baptist camp, the 1689 camp, the confessional camp, that really don't want to see him as part of their legacy. But that's not me. This guy is like, I'd say he, along with Spurgeon and Gill and those guys who incidentally are all kind of on the fringe a little bit, are they are the treasures, of our tradition.
Yeah.
And
100%.
And it's
he's pre 1689.
Yeah.
Well, pre-active toleration.
Yeah. Exactly.
But
he's right in the mix.
Before things came together in a much more homogenized way.
Yeah, that's true.
He was in that looser stage where it hadn't quite landed. There was something awesome there, because he believed in open membership.
Yeah.
Just as a distinctive, let's have
not without
everyone
controversy,
in the same church.
No, without controversy. So anyways, where I was going with that is like, basically, he's got all this glorious, what we would consider basically perfect theology, right? And yet he's got a freshness about him as well, which I really appreciate. Even if I must admit, I don't agree with a lot of what he says. There are some real angles that I would disagree, but I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I always appreciate that freshness, that you could see this guy was just steeped in his Bible, and he was ready to go, and
he was an original thinker, and he had a system of thought.
Totally. Isn't it amazing? Also, we should just say, this thought always blows my mind, is that the quip about him is always that he's like the only guy who never read an English classic who ended up writing the greatest of them, and he only had 2 books, if I understand correctly, in his library: the Bible and Fox's Book of the Martyrs. That kind of
his imagination.
How do you even put that together? What a dude. He's really one of those incredible.
And wasn't Pilgrim's Progress published by Owen? Because of Owen's influence at the end of the day.
That's true. And Owen himself, there's that famous statement where Owen said, "Hey, look, I would take all my learning and flush it down the toilet," kind of thing, for one moment of this guy's preaching.
To preach.
Yeah. So anyway, there we go. There's a little bio off the cuff, but cool. I would really encourage people, if they haven't, even if you don't like what we're going to say this evening, go read the book and read something about Bunyan, because you will be encouraged by it, definitely, as a Christian. All right,
cool.
Give us a.
Shall I kick us off? So I've got a picture.
Wow, poor people that are listening on the.
I know, like audio is getting a raw dip.
There you go, and that's the end of it. That's all I have to say about
that.
Right.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so basically, the book divides up into 11 chapters. And of course, it begins in the city of distraction and ends in the celestial city. So Christian starts in the city of distraction. He begins to read his book. And as a result of reading his book, he has a tremendous sense of conviction of sin. And he realizes his need of salvation. And the first stop is through the Slough of Despond. At that point, there is an opportunity to choose a road, and he meets Worldly Wise, and Worldly Wise sends him up Mount Sinai, where he nearly dies, where Evangelist sort of comes and rescues him and puts him back on the road. And it's then that he comes to the narrow gate. And after going through the narrow gate, he goes to Interpreter's house. After coming out of Interpreter's house, he comes to the place of deliverance. And that's where his burden rolls away. And then he meets another fork in the road, where he's got the 2 wrong ways, the path to destruction or to danger, and then there's the hill of difficulty. You'll probably remember the event where he falls asleep on the hill of difficulty and loses his role. Remember that one? His assurance.
Yeah.
And then he passes between the 2 lions, and he comes to the House Beautiful, where he meets the 3 maidens. From the House Beautiful, he then goes through the Valley of Humiliation, and that's the great battle. Then he goes through the Valley of the Shadow of Death. Then he hooks up with Faithful, his traveling companion. And then he gets to Vanity Fair. At Vanity Fair, Faithful is killed, and he leaves and he meets up another companion, and this is hopeful. And there's a plain called Ease, and then there's Bypath Meadow, and they take Bypath Meadow and they come to Doubting Castle, where there's the giants, and I forget the giant's name.
Like, do you want to give all the spoilers though?
I just want to lay it out, and we want to come back to this.
Like, dude, why don't you just go ahead and tell them if they make it?
Well, I'm nearly finished, so just let me finish. Then there's the Delectable Mountains, the Enchanted Ground, the Land of Beulah, the River, and finally the Celestial City.
All right, so they do make it in the end.
They do make it in the end. Spoiler alert.
I don't think
like, just remind me not to hang out with you before I read a book. My goodness. That got treated like, you know what that got treated like? That got treated like Louis Berkhof's systematic theology. Got broken down into its chunks, the beginning, middle, and end.
I found it very helpful, Nick. I found it very helpful.
Yeah, for those who want content, I'll satisfy their needs.
Well, okay, listen. It's true that even if you do know the story, you won't lose anything, because it's not really in that. We know the metaphor itself comes from the Christian life, so we're good. But yeah, you still get all the substances you read through the text and the dialogues that happen in between. A lot of dialogues at least happening. You know, I've forgotten how much of that was in the book. It's really just extended, like, hey, what happened to you? You know, oh, well, this happened to me. And then he sort of has.
There's a lot of repeats, isn't there? There's sort of like at the beginning of every chapter, there's a recap.
Yeah.
Where someone asks him, and then what? And then what did you say?
And then what did you say?
What happened? Yeah.
But you know what I loved about it this time around? Because I remember it did annoy me the first time. I think I was just trying to get through it or something. But this time I was like really appreciating it, because I realized what he was doing. He was actually reinforcing. I think maybe because I know my daughter's reading it now, you know? So I'm like, wow, what a masterful reinforcement.
Yes, she needs to hear that again. Great place.
Well, it's just this basic stuff that I want her to know about, that he's just really, you know, he's not just skimping over it. He's digging deep on these big themes. And that's really amazing. That's helpful.
Yeah. Well, I remember just thinking, like, you would like ask a question. But have you thought about this? And I'd be like, oh my goodness, I hadn't thought about that. I'm like, what on earth is you going to say about that? And then you would go on to like, but it was quite Puritan in the sense that, like, you could, in the same way when you're reading John Owen's like theology, you know, and he'll raise this point and you're thinking, my goodness, this is like so minute. It's like, you know, he's really picking it apart to an acute level of detail. And then with Bunyan, he does that, but in the conversations, you know, so like you can see the same kind of approach coming through, but natural. Just in the narrative style.
So Mike, you want to look at Bunyan's covenant theology. Why don't you kick us off with that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of those conversations. There are some funny moments. I gotta say that, well, you know, as you were saying, this kind of like this stilted question answer thing where, you know, and wherefore unto art thou? I mean, how many persons does this one God exist, kind of thing, you know? Well, he exists in 3 persons, you know, just rattling off the catechism.
It's like the evangelistic conversation you never have.
Exactly. And oh man, how's Evangelist? He's like this really intense character. Like, he's just takes every opportunity to preach the best sermon ever. And I don't know, man. It's just a great book. So many amazing things about it. But the one part I found myself like wincing a little bit at this time around, which is interesting for me. I don't know if this says more about me or Bunyan, but he, you know, there are some things where I was like, well, because, you know, you mentioned the Puritan bit. It's very much like, we don't talk to those guys, you know, because those guys are just a little bit, I had to catch myself thinking, man, he does sound a little bit arrogant at some points, you know, and, you know, you can imagine how it might've been a bit of a bristling experience to be around the real John Bunyan. Like, it might've been, you know, my way or the highway at some level. So I don't know, but I think that might've come through a little bit this time around for me. And, you know, that's always worth, I don't know. I think I feel less and less like just knowing the Reformed battles through and through from the inside out. Context. Yeah, you just sort of feel like I just don't want that ugliness to kind of have its say. But obviously, in theory, I mean, you're with him all the way, and everything he's saying is 100%. But yeah, we wanted to look at the covenant. So again, what I did was just to, I think probably if you think about Pilgrim's Progress, probably my thought on how to approach it would just be to go, okay, well, is there any is there any mention of, the covenant of redemption? Is there any mention of the covenant of works? Is there any mention of the covenant of grace? Or not so much as the terms go, but the concepts, are they coming through in any meaningful way in the book? And then all the things in between. You mentioned the law. The real take home from covenant of works versus covenant of grace is the law gospel contrast. What do we do with Moses? What do we do with the law in the Christian life? All these things are kind of the applications. And then I think you even got an interesting slant with him with the baptism, what we know about him anyway, with having a different view of the covenant sign to a lot of covenant theologians at the time, even Reformed Baptist ones. And then even just kind of being in those dangerously, potentially hyper-Calvinistic sort of days, where things could have gone wrong very easily. So I think there is a lot to talk about. Now, I think it is a big study, and you probably, we're not even going to do it close to anything that, someone could really just work with this for a long time and come up with some pretty amazing things, I think. But it is just a good thought just to read. And I'm thinking more than covenant theology. I'm thinking also about the two-age sojourning paradigm. And maybe let's start there, because I do know that he, in fact, I pulled up a few essays that I found. The one was by, so if anyone does want to follow this, I won't put this on the show notes because you won't find it online. It's you need access to journals to get to this, as far as I understand. So I'm not sure that I would even be able to put a link there. But just if you want to Google Richard Greaves, for what it's worth, he wrote an essay called John Bunyan and Covenant Thought in the 17th Century. And that was very helpful. And then there is another one. It was the idea. Yeah, it was Brainerd P. Stranahan, who's referenced quite a bit. Bunyan in the Epistle to the Hebrews, his source for the idea of pilgrimage in Pilgrim's Progress, which just caught my attention because of preaching through Hebrews. So, I mean, I think just even on that, you could almost just start with that and go, well, the title, Pilgrim's Progress, if he did get that from Hebrews chapter 12, which is a thoroughly covenant, I'm like really appreciating more than ever, is thoroughly covenantal from beginning to end, then immediately you're talking covenant theology from the word go. You're thinking patriarchal days, you're thinking the time of sojourn, you're thinking even the fact that he is relating that to the new covenant and getting to our sort of two-age sojourning pilgrimage, not theocratic vibe, it means that whether he articulated it in so many ways or not, it went through the rubric that got him there, which is the rubric we're trying to uphold. So I think just even on that title alone and getting the whole idea from Hebrews is an important starting point for us.
Didn't he also write on he wrote
yes.
on the covenants?
Well, totally, he did, and that's exactly what I was going to say now. I mean, he's it's probably just helpful to know. I mean, he wrote a commentary on Genesis. Unfortunately, didn't get to the part, like as far as I know, it stops at Genesis 11, I think it is. Yes, just before Abraham. It's like, come on. But it was crazy. I was reading through it, and he remember not last week, Nick, we were talking about Nehemiah Cox and kind of that way in which the Noahic covenant just got splurged and it was the covenant of grace, and Bunyan does the same thing. So he just completely doesn't even think about it in terms of common grace. It's all just one big gracious covenant. And so it's interesting in that he really sets up a real collision course for the very idea of pilgrimage as he set it forth in the book. But I think it is, I would put that down to just part of that they hadn't really thought about that at that extent, and it hadn't been pushed at that point. And so I think
at that point they also weren't carving out a place for common grace because a lot was theonomic or theocratic at that point.
Well, and that's what kind of, I suppose it took me by surprise, because Baptists are half down their track anyway, and they would have had to wrestle with this concept regardless. And so they're sort of de facto two kingdom guys because they're getting cast out of the kingdom, of the world at some level. They certainly are more cognizant than anyone else at the time that the British crown was not the kingdom of God, and there they are trying to put the two kingdoms together.
Well, I'm not sure how hard the contrast was. I remember reading something that Jim Marinihan said. So during the time of the writing of the First London Baptist Confession of the 1644, You know, it's sort of intimated that ministers should not be paid by the state. You know, whew. And then there was pushback, and they retracted it.
Yeah, right, totally.
So well, but
we know what was motivating that.
The edge of that, but they're not. It's not this black and white contrast.
No, it's definitely still getting worked out without a doubt. But it's getting worked out in the context of Baptist thought, which is, you know, I mean, you got to like, what are you going to do with your babies? You know, you can't get them, can't get the papers the same way. So part of it's wrapped up in that whole question. And then also, as you know, I mean, we just think about the whole conundrum there with the 1689 and the rebellion that we were talking about last week that was kind of involved in many of the guys who were framing the 1689. And so there was all sorts of political stuff going on.
But when the Baptists, I mean, I didn't get the sense that the Baptists were like eager to do away with the whole the business of church and state as we think of it today, but more to kind of replace they were more backing the whole Parliament thing, weren't they?
You know, I think this is part of the thing that was being worked out. But like, for example, there, I forget the guy's name.
It's still very church and state, but just a very different idea of what church and state meant, and that it was more democratic, more representative rather than monarchical and hierarchical.
Yeah, so the Westminster Confession said that one of the responsibilities of the state is to punish heresy. And so with the independents in the Savoy and the Baptists, they began to say, no, that's a bad idea. And so you definitely see a drift away from that sort of emphasis. And even the Presbyterians themselves, when the Americans rewrote the Westminster Confession, they dropped that part in the later 1700s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, totally. And I'm just while you're talking, I'm trying to get this article. I remember there was a guy, people know this article well, and it's actually really helpful. But another one is written by, I'm forgetting his name as well. It's the famous guy, Timothy George, who put an article in one of the White Horse Inn Modern Reformation magazines that just really explored this a little bit from Baptist thought, which I thought was very good. But he didn't mention this article. Let me just type in Baptist here in my little thing and see what quickly comes up. Baptist theology, no. Separating. Here we go. Yes, Ronald Baines. Oh
yeah, he does a lot of articles for the.
Well, he's dead now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He did a lot of articles.
Yeah, in fact, he died. He was doing his PhD on this topic, and he died before he actually. They posthumously they conferred the degree to him, but it's kind of like quite a harrowing scenario. So I think people kind of knew him. I think Jim Brennan knows him and all these guys. But anyway, so Separating God's Two Kingdoms is called Two Kingdom Theology Among the New England Baptists in the Early Republic. Really helpful, and it shows. Yeah, it was full on. I mean, they were in this, you know, and they were calling for, you know, something that we would be very happy with, I think, you know.
Further separation. Yeah. Because, I mean, our notion of common grace is very much more, so we're working in a context where there's a secular government, not a Christian government.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to carve out a position where from, you know, secular governments can use natural law, you know, by virtue of God's providential means through common grace of continuing to establish law and order apart from Christians trying to take over the government.
And it's just a known thing that you know, common grace was not a doctrine that was worked on at all. I mean, you got something going on with the Remonstrance, you know, with the Calvinism Remonstrance thing, with the Arminian clash. They took it up at some small level. Calvin dealt with it more in terms of providence and, you know, just a general providence of creation. You had Kuyper, and well, even before that, I suppose you had who's the three? Hodge dealt with it a little bit, but then Kuyper was the big guy, and that's way later, you know. So after Kuyper, really, people started to think about it in the way that we're now thinking about it. So I think that's important to keep in mind. So anyways, we're getting Bunyan off the hook here with all of that. You know, so he wasn't driving at theonomy by making that point, is what we're saying. And that's relevant to his covenant theology. I don't know where that might feature. Well, look, here's what I would say in terms of Pilgrim's Progress. Like the entire book, in fact, I did pick this up. in my reading this time around, especially in Vanity Fair, for example. There he is getting tried at Vanity Fair. I mean, you've got my kingdom is not of this world. It's basically what's going on over and over again. And the whole book is essentially a polemic against theonomy at some level, because it's moving in a very much hey, just, in fact, I think there was this one, oh man, I wanted to jot it down, but I think it was, obviously they're saying something against faithful at the trial. And then either he says something in defense of himself, or someone says something, I can't remember. But one of the virtues upheld at that point in his defense was that he was, living a quiet life, and something that was not at all getting involved needlessly in the affairs of men and so forth.
Yeah.
And so if anything, they were kind of moving too far in that Anabaptistic direction, or sort of the paradoxical thing was even getting left behind. It was almost like a world versus the church thing. But anyways, the bottom line is that it definitely wasn't promoting theonomy of any sort. I mean, in none of those dialogues, nothing that was upheld there would in any way move into a transformationalist direction. So I noted that for the first time in my read this time through.
Yeah. I wonder if that's also feeding off of the, in the early 17th century, when James I came in and the Puritans thought, great, we've got a king from England. He's from Presbyterian background. Now we can push our Puritan agenda. And they came to him, and basically he rebuffed them.
Yeah.
And he's the one who started promoting sports on the Sabbath. And the Puritans more and more withdrew. And it's during his reign that the Mayflower went to America to go find their own religion. They wanted, a true place to go and practice. So I'm wondering if some of that's also feeding into it. So it's not purely a church and state discussion.
Yeah. Well, he does actually mention that Stranahan sounds like Renahan, but it's not. Stranahan.
If your surname ends with Han, you're a church historian.
Yeah. He does mention a little bit of that. So anyway, so that's something just off the cuff. We haven't even got into the meat of it yet. But one of the things that was
interestingly, I think the Mayflower actually left from the dock down the road from me.
1620. Is it Bristol? Where are you?
No, I'm in Felixstowe, but I think it left from Harwich, which is like literally across the river from us. So
nice.
There you go.
There we go.
Interesting.
There we go.
I don't know that for a fact, but I just vaguely remember seeing that museum in Harwich last time I was there. So there you go.
Nice.
Go check it out.
Cool. The other thing is just to, beyond the Genesis commentary, which is extremely helpful on the covenant of works, obviously, because he's dealing with the garden. It just takes all the guesswork out. You know where he's coming from, as he writes the book. Covenant was a big deal for this guy. There's just no doubt about it.
Well, didn't he write a book called like On Work, Law and Grace or something?
Yeah, unfolding, what is it called? Law and Grace or something like that. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's a big exposition on the covenantal forms of law and grace as they move their way through the Bible. Big biblical theology, really. And there too, you get a lot of clear ideas of what he had in view. So, I mean, with that in mind, what we could do maybe is just go through, think about each covenant in turn, and just see what we come up with in terms of the book. And I'll just kind of mention what I found in the various essays.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds good.
So let's go with covenant of. Let's start with the covenant of redemption. Actually, this might be a negative way to start, but this was the one area that I read that Bunyan's theology kept on irritating me, because he's holding that bi-covenantal structure. So it's covenant of works, covenant of grace, and then doing the typical Baptist thing where it just covenant of redemption, covenant of grace gets splurged into one. They don't like the two because then it gives grounds for like all sorts of other things. And he was Baptist, he didn't see reason to include anyone but the elect in the covenant of grace. And so, as for those who are interested, I think we did years ago do a episode on this where I think we were talking about Gill, but Tom Askell has written a brilliant essay where he compares, or not essay, sorry, dissertation, and it's available for free now. I had to buy the thing, but now it's for free. Nice. So you can go and get that. Where you basically, he's taking Fuller, who obviously was not hyper-Calvinistic, and Gill, who was leaning that way, and he was going, what's the deal? And the big deal is that you see the importance come through here in the covenant of grace, covenant of redemption. Even if you're not trying to advocate some sort of Presbyterian doctrine through the covenant of grace being separate historical administration, it's still important to have. Otherwise, you start collapsing time into eternity, and even just the language becomes frustrating because you're trying to fit law and grace into the same thing, and like Christ has done something for you by works, and yet it's for you by grace, and it's the same covenant. And this is what Klein actually wrestled with, because he started off with the bicovenantal thing, and then he was like, it's just not working. It's not fitting all the details in. You got Christ as the covenant Lord, and Christ is the covenant servant. You need two different covenants, you know? And so you see, like, this is all the essayists, they work with this in Bunyan, and it's driving them nuts, you know, because it's like, what is it? What is he saying here? And you can see.
I mean, Mike, maybe you can help me with just a question. Because I mean, we would understand, I mean, the Westminster doesn't have a developed doctrine of the covenant of redemption, though of course they would believe it.
Yeah.
And it was really Owen who brought it forward in the Savoy, and he's a contemporary of John Bunyan.
Yeah.
And then as Baptists, we build on Owen, as it were, in his integration of the covenant of redemption into the larger standards. Yeah. So, I mean, isn't it anachronistic to ask Bunyan to comment on this if he's a contemporary of Owen, and Owen's the one who's really helping us as Reformed Baptists to establish that direction?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, it's less a matter of being unfair on Bunyan, and more just this is the frustrating part of the problem. You know, this is why we needed Owen to come and develop that.
Yeah,
because
I mean, he wrestled with the covenant of redemption in conversation with, you know, the Trinity and all of the other doctrines as well. You know, he saw the implications and he tried to map it out.
And to be fair, I mean, everything Bunyan's saying we'd agree with under the category of the covenant of redemption. It's just that it gets so darn confusing when you flip over, or he just uses this language, especially with the sensitivity that we attach to all of this by way of what we now know. Because I mean, he was kind of involved in those debates with the guys that were saying, hey, the guys were being accused of antinomianism, you know, precisely for that reason. They were just collapsing time and eternity, and just the Baptists were really to blame on a lot of those things. But the other thing is just, you know, if you don't have a covenant of redemption, it's interesting that what happens is that you start wrestling with this issue of conditionality in a way that gets so messy, because now what are the conditions of the covenant of grace? And then the rhetoric just goes crazy, because it's like, well, Christ met the conditions, you know, and obviously everyone agrees with that, because that's like, obviously, and we would say amen in terms of a covenant of redemption, like that, you know, that is the condition of the covenant. It's a covenant of works, really, that Christ has fulfilled. And therefore we have this covenant of grace, to which you might say we have a condition of faith in a certain qualified sense, you know, but we're able to just very, very clearly bring that out with those two covenants. Whereas you mish those together and it's like, wow,
it's not a condition, therefore you are justified from eternity.
Now somehow what you're doing has to be like qualified in the sense that you're not doing what Christ did. And it's like, wow, what a mission. And then you see it come through also where they're trying to work it out. And this would obviously be the big question. I was very interested in this, going through it again. Found it very hard to figure out, though. You know, how does Bunyan stand in relation to 1689 federalism? And where would he have, and really the central question there for me would be, how would he view the Abrahamic covenant?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of discussion there, nor the types of shadows, nor
I actually feel like I came away with some fairly, I don't know if, like, look, I'm not claiming to be a Bunyan expert by any stretch, so someone might prove me wrong on this, but I feel fairly confident from what I read that it would be hard for me to see otherwise anyway at this point, that he would emphatically not think of the Abrahamic covenant as a covenant of works. In fact, he's very clear that begins at Moses. You know, there is something going on. He had a very strong doctrine of republication. So he was right there. He was, you see that come through.
Do not go back to Moses. Do not go back to the law. The law will kill you.
Exactly. That comes through, right? In
very early on. So after the Slough of Despond, he meets Worldly Wise, and Worldly Wise advises him to go see Mr. Legalist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's all these allusions that you you know, I can't remember what they were now, but yeah, you definitely got the feeling that, hey, this is the covenant of works. This is not part of an administration of the covenant of grace. Yeah. The law is, and if anything, he you know, certainly he had a place for the law in the Christian life, but he pushed back on a lot of those that were trying to say that the law was even, like, in any sense, gracious.
Yeah. I remember that conversation with Mr. Legalist was one of the conversations where I thought, my goodness, he's really drilling down on this.
Yeah.
and with the conversation between them and the kind of questions that he's asking. And I'm thinking, whoa, well, and that and Mr. Talkative, I think those were the two ones that I thought were most hammered out, because I was like, oh, I think Mr. Talkative's got a point there. And then I was like, yeah, clearly.
Well,
clearly.
You know what? Okay, this is a little side hustle here, but in terms of that talkative thing, I found out, man, we need to do a whole session on this alone, because you've got, what are we doing right now? I mean, podcasts and the sort of thing. I mean, we sort of got this whole deal where
in a multitude of words, sin is not lacking.
Right. And he really drives it home, doesn't he? I mean, you've got there's got to be something else going on. And I found myself thinking, oh man, like,
I don't know. I would put what we're doing now into when they're going through the enchanted ground, where there's a strong temptation to sleep. Yes. And he draws on fellowship and conversation with hopeful to keep himself awake.
Yes.
That's what I think this would feed into, rather than
I don't know if you guys picked this up. I don't know if you picked this up, but I found years a little bit of I almost felt like I had a little Bible moment in the Pilgrim's Progress, which is kind of, it was like, I usually only get this when I'm preaching. So maybe we should add Pilgrim's Progress to the canon. Because if it's all about subjectively deciding which book is in the Bible, then who knows what just happened there. But basically, you get that end point. It's in the chapter where he's done talkative, whatever that is, okay? And they go through and he's dissing, talking, and talking. It's got to be action, blah, blah, blah. And then it ends by them talking. And he explicitly mentions, almost in a way that contradicts the whole thing that's gone before, that he and was it Innocent or Faithful at that point?
Faithful dies at Vanity Fair.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Joins him after Vanity Fair.
So Faithful and him go on talking to keep themselves, engaged through the difficult road ahead or something. But there is a moment there where I thought, oh well, there we go. I would imagine if I was an English guy and I was looking for all these textual clues and analysis, I would want to see that as a point where Bunyan sort of keeps himself from being misunderstood on this. He's not slamming the conversational piece in the Christian life and the real value of talking at the end of the day, but not in such a way that was hypocritical and so forth. So I mean, the real thing with talkative came out where there's a section where he just goes on about how bad talkative actually is, and you're like, okay, wow, this guy's pretty diabolical. Okay.
Because I mean, I think there is a strong theme throughout Pilgrim's Progress, and it's the theme of friendship.
Yes.
So talkative is not inside the friendship bubble. So we're faithful, and Christian are friends, and there's that sense of, two is better than one, and they're carrying each other through. And the same thing with hopeful. So when faithful dies, the Lord raises up another friend, hopeful. Yeah. There's the sustaining fellowship throughout this deep friendship.
Another thing that just comes to mind now, man, I don't know if you guys had this. I don't know why this kept on happening, as I was reading it, but those moments with in Lord of the Rings where they're moving along and those constant little moments of conversation between Samwise and who's the guy, the Hobbit
Frodo.
Thank you. They're like real little moments like that, right? It's just like where he's encouraging him.
Well, it's that friendship theme again.
The friendship theme,
fellowship.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly.
Definitely. It's a strong theme all the way through.
Totally.
Now, maybe I could, at this point, before we get onto the Covenant of Works, maybe just bring in a critique of John Bunyan. So it was Spurgeon who tells the story of a conversation with an uneducated woman who criticized Pilgrim's Progress. So you can imagine, well, here's, Spurgeon, and what can this woman say that would be bad about Pilgrim's Progress? And she raised an interesting point. She said, John Bunyan got it wrong because Christians should have dropped his burden at the gate and not carried it any further. Instead, he took it all the way to the cross.
I think justification thing going on there.
Exactly. And I think what's so interesting about the book, which really places it in its time and relates it to John Bunyan's own experience, is we know that John Bunyan had a very heavy legal experience where he came under incredible conviction of sin. He thought he had blasphemed the Holy Spirit. He lacked assurance for the whole beginning of his Christian walk. And as a result, he carried his burden when he should not have. Yeah. And it's probably worth just noting that the first part, all the way up until the place of deliverance, really does reflect Bunyan's own experience, and I guess the typical Puritan experience, because the Puritans would preach the law in order to bring you into a sense of, I am feeling very guilty in my need for Christ. And then, you come to Christ, but that you don't necessarily come to an assurance of salvation. And so he's gone through the narrow gate. He goes to interpret his house, but he's still got his burden.
Yeah.
And it's only when he gets to the place of deliverance that it rolls off at the cross that he really gets his role of assurance. And it's worth just noting that.
I think that's true. And I think that's why it's important, because I think a lot of what Pilgrim's Progress is doing is tapping into Christian experience rather than objective Christian or objective theological realities.
Yeah. So this woman said to Spurgeon, I would have got rid of my burden at the gate.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Want some.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is also just like, I do remember that actually. I do remember the wondering about like why he's carrying the burden for so long. And I do think also it did make me wonder where exactly in the Pilgrim's Progress, Bunyan places the whole kind of regeneration event. Like where exactly in that story does it happen?
Yeah.
Because and I think that's it's an interesting question. I'm not sure.
But I think the Puritan view, just tapping into Ian Murray's analysis of Puritan preaching and the sort of old way of preaching the gospel, is that there was a law work that preceded a grace work. 90% law, 10% grace. Where Wesley, following the typical Puritan view, would see that you preach the law to bring them into a sense of their sins, so that they can finally trust in Christ. And after getting through the slough of despond, when he's having a conversation with Worldly Wise asks the question, so how did you come by your burden? And he says, well, I got it when I was reading my book, which is obviously the Bible. And so then the whole point of him going to Sinai is because, Worldly Wise promises him that he can get rid of his burden by going to Sinai. And it's this whole conflict with his guilt. And he tries to do it by keeping the law, and he cannot. And it's only when it comes to the cross that it gets rolled off. But
Well, that reminds me of something I read in that essay by Greaves. He said that one of the things that comes through, and I think he phrased it this way rather than Bunyan in any point, but he said, in all his study, he would sort of condense the whole thing this way. But as they're going through the slough of despond, really the big question Bunyan would have the reader ask, in light of his theology is, and he puts it, which of the two covenants are you under, O my soul? And, is it a covenant of works or a covenant of grace ultimately? And that just really is the bottom line. And if you are, so yeah, it's like it's like this real big thing to get in, and then once you're in though, that's the thing you hold on to, like it's got to be that. And you see this come out in these conversations with along the way where, hey, it's impossible that unless the gatekeeper effectively opened for you, you're just never going to be this Christian, So you can see that very high Calvinism coming through there. But then once you're in, it's like, wow, you are under a covenant of grace at this point, and that's just the end of that. And now it's your duty again and again just to call your own soul to remember this, And I thought that was a great point.
Maybe just a weakness that I found through the story, and I guess it's a weakness that the framing of the story in itself doesn't lend itself to this, but the centrality of the church to the Christian life. So you see the interpreter's house, and you see the house beautiful. But I would have loved to have seen it as regular inns throughout the whole journey.
Well, what about the shepherds and there
were a couple of places of relief, and a couple of places.
I feel like I always, unless I was just interpreting them wrongly, but I sort of, that was my immediate kind of, church, got to keep coming.
Because there was a mention of the sort of pastor that you should look for, and the sort of shepherd you should follow. But it didn't feature, like every Lord's Day.
Yes, okay.
And every Lord's Day we're going to church. Every Lord's Day we're with the Lord's people. Every Lord's Day we're partaking of the Lord's Supper, sitting under the Word. So you don't experience that. There is this little bit of a sense of a lone wolf Christian experience.
Yes,
it's not
totally.
So it lacks an ecclesiological emphasis, though it is mentioned.
But I actually did think about that.
Story, anyway.
And I just, what happened to me when I started thinking about that, I was like, it's almost like you can do that with any part of the thing. You know, it's almost like this is the problem, as you mentioned earlier. It doesn't really lend itself to making points like that, because the whole idea of an allegory is that all of that is going to go out the window. You know,
Exactly.
you have to like, and I've noticed it a lot when I've been explaining the allegories to the kids. You know, because firstly, you have to get your mind around the fact that, okay, actually, it's kind of like this weird overlap, because they talk about Jesus in the allegory. And Jesus is
it's
not
it's like a Puritan allegory, not a medieval allegory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
it's like allegory, but it's still being pretty literal.
Well, it's like if all of a sudden, it's kind of, what do they call it, like historical fiction or something, where all of a sudden you're in a fantasy, but then all of a sudden, like, there's a Roman Catholic there. You know, it's like Lord of the Rings gone Rome, you know, and like there is all the.
Well, it's a bit more like C.S. Lewis, where Santa rocks.
Yes,
in the Chronicles
exactly.
of Narnia. That's a bit more like,
yeah, exactly. And they're sort of in the World War II setting and whatnot. But anyway, so you've got all of that. So you got to try and get your mind around this. And yes, we're going on a journey, but no, we're not actually going anywhere. And we're kind of, so you don't actually have to move around.
It can only illustrate so much.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so, he's worked this thing to its absolute core. But yeah, I mean, it's like almost any point is going to suffer from that analogy. Because of the analogy.
But I think it is a good, a good observation though, Nick. But I think, again, if you see I think he tries to portray that need through the fellowships and the friendships and that kind of thing, but not through the ins. But I like the idea of the ins. I think that would have been really cool if they were like, regular, you can almost
regular in stops.
Yeah. Well, because the inns, I think, function a bit like that early on in Tolkien. Like the Prancing Pony and that kind of thing. I think there was an inn in Hobbiton as well, where they are like these little respites in the story, in like Tom Bombadil's house and that kind of thing. So I think that would have been a really cool addition.
What are the King's Meadows at the end? I didn't quite figure that out. Should have looked that up, but I have no idea. Where they're kind of the waiting room before the Celestial City. What is that?
Oh, I thought that was heaven, basically.
Yeah. So like, I was getting stuck on
at
intermediate
that point,
state.
Yeah, I wouldn't try and match it up with the intermediate state, and
No, I mean,
but it was just that kind of idea. It's just the kind of,
because he hadn't died yet, like he hadn't gone through the waters yet.
Yeah, because the waters is death. Yeah.
So I sort of put that down to church, to be honest. Like I was just like, okay, there's a
because at one point there's like the land of Beulah, and I thought to myself, okay, is that when the guy's like in his like deathbed? Now he's just like lying in bed, and now it's just from here on in, it's basically just contemplation of heaven and all the last moments of a man's life as he looks that way.
Totally, that could work.
Yeah.
It was a little bit like Hebrew prose in that, and even just the Bible really, and the way that the half the goal is not to answer the question, but just gets you to ask the question, and then because the question is so mesmerizing, or because it's so all encompassing, that's kind of the point. You're sort of ready to answer the question via other angles because you've asked it, and it had a lot of those moments for me. You've just like, you don't really get the answer, but to have that at the forefront of your mind as you read the story ends up being really important somehow, and quite amazing as the process went through. On a few different points.
So what was your favorite part of Pilgrim's Progress?
Oh man, I know the most convicting part, but we'll jump over that.
That can be a favorite part.
Yeah. No, I would have to say for me, the most like profound part was Faithful.
Yeah.
And the most not profound, but just something, I don't know, just crazy. And then and it was just like,
that was the first time ever in my life I cried reading a book.
Yeah.
And
it was
I think it's probably the last time I ever cried reading a book. And I think and I was like, what is this thing that's happening to me? Like
suck it back in. Suck it back in.
I never cried during any like media of any kind. This is an utterly bizarre experience.
Yeah. But then oh man, the going through the waters of death has stuck with me.
Powerful,
I mean, that really has stuck with me, and I think it probably will be on my mind
regularly. I've listened to that book 4 times, and the last 2 times I listened to it, I remember I just like stop.
Yeah,
and the trumpets are blowing, and the angels are welcoming.
I mean, it's so amazing. It's just wow, it's so amazing.
Yeah.
So there we go. There's a spoiler.
Well, the other bit
does go to heaven.
Yeah, it wasn't like a climax of the story or anything, but it did stick in my mind very, very vividly. Was about him falling asleep and the scroll rolling out of his pocket and that kind of thing.
So that was on the hill of difficulty.
Yeah. And just like he finds this little what does he call it? Like an enclave. What's it called? What's the word he uses? It's not like a cove, but it's something like that.
A veil or something.
And and it's just like this little place of rest, and you rest just a little bit too long. You know, it's like get back in the battle, right? Get back on the pilgrimage.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of imagery of just like, you know, it's good at points in the Christian life to be indulgent and to just feed off of the word but then to make it a selfish thing for too long, where it's not seeking to work its way out and in other people's lives.
Kind of like you now on Sabbath. So dang long.
Exactly. I got to get back in the saddle.
Resonated with you, Andre.
I got to get back in the saddle, otherwise I'm going to fall asleep and I'm going to lose the skill.
Lose your role.
And I mean, obviously, the other grand is the Valley of Humiliation, where there's the confrontation with Beelzebub. You know, where he comes and he shoots. It's this day-long battle. You know, all day long they're battling, and there's arrow after arrow, and he gets hit in the shoulder and the arm and the foot, and then he falls down, and finally he reaches for his sword. You will not, what's it? Triumph over me, oh my enemy, though I rise, I shall fall. And he smites him. Yeah.
That would make a great chest tattoo right here. Ooh,
yeah, I agree, except that you've got a big picture of Satan on your chest.
That's a good point.
So be it.
So it's like, that's the one that's the struggle that
as long as there's kind of blood coming out of his
why
neck.
would I want a tattoo of the devil on my chest?
I had not thought about that before. That's a good point. Glad we had this conversation now.
And then, you know, one of the things just reinforced, I think, in light of what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which I think is important for me, it's one of those minor themes in the book, but it just stays. And I'm always surprised at how much it hits me when I go through it. Just the sweetness of fellowship, you know, is the real key to that whole journey. You know, so coming back to for whatever it lacks in terms of some ecclesiological sort of centrality there, it certainly gains in terms of, like, you can't do this alone. You know, you need to know Christians that are, and even just doing what we're doing now, and just being plugged in and talking in the good sense one's way through to stay encouraged and to be reminded, because of all these things you forget. And it's usually just these simple things that they're saying to each other, like, brother, let's not forget that at the end of the day, this is what's going to happen. And he's like, that is a sweet thought. Thank you for reminding me of that.
And I guess, dude,
there we go. Only a Christian can understand that. That's the thing.
But also, I mean, just one of the things about the death, you know, when Christian really loses it when he's passing through the river, like, he's truly scared of death. And I don't know about you, but as a pastor, you know, I've had a lot of conversations, and some people are just genuinely scared of death. You know, they're actually really
most
petrified.
people, I would say. Most people.
So just that I mean, there was a moment of real reality going on there, and then just to see how Hopeful's friendship really sort of really mattered at that point was very helpful.
Exactly. So more we could say, but that is hopefully a good dose. I do have a whole bunch of quotes here, but I don't think we should touch them now. I think that's a good note to end on. And maybe we can come back to this again. But I do like the idea of bridging out from this into something, thinking about friendship, and just some of the classics are written on that. So it might be a good way to just broaden out a little bit. Sweet. Thank you, brothers and friends. That was a good journey through the pilgrimage.
Goodbye, fellow pilgrims.
Goodbye.
Yes, indeed.
Sojourn.